Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. I'm both excited and honored to sit with Eric Goldstein, the CEO of UJA-Federation of New York, one of the most influential Jewish leaders of our time, who recently announced his decision to step down from UJA at the end of this fiscal year. For the past 11 years, Eric has guided the largest local philanthropy in the Jewish world through some of the most defining moments in recent memory, from the 2014 Gaza War to the COVID-19 pandemic to the war in Ukraine and now the aftermath of October 7th. A former leading partner at Paul Weiss, Eric left behind a distinguished legal career to lead UJA in 2014. Under his leadership, UJA has mobilized billions of dollars in philanthropy, strengthening thousands of Jewish institutions, and has emerged as a unifying force at a time of growing polarization in the Jewish community. As Eric prepares to step down in 2026, this conversation is a chance for us to look back on his remarkable tenure, to explore what he's learned about Jewish leadership, community, and unity, and to look ahead at the challenges and opportunities facing the Jewish future, both in New York and beyond. Eric, thank you so much. I'm so excited that you're here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's a long time. As our viewers know, I also was at Paul Weiss. I have lots of memories and how you took care of me and many other associates there.
Two former litigators.
Yeah, exactly. I always mention Shuli Karkowski. The three of us were all at Paul Weiss, and now we're running around trying to do things for the Jews. So before we even get to Paul Weiss, tell me a little bit just of your own. I actually don't know this. I met you at Paul Weiss. Tell me about the story before Paul Weiss.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm a native New Yorker, born in Brooklyn, grew up in Queens. A product of modern Orthodoxy, yeshiva day schools and, modern Orthodox summer camps, many of them. I was a music counselor at Camp Hillel, going back a ways, and went straight from college to law school to Paul Weiss. This is the second job I've ever had, so pretty 31 years at Paul Weiss and what will be 12 years at UJA. And I've remained on the Upper West Side of Manhattan for the last over 40 years. With the exception of one actually consequential year, I lived with my family in Israel, 2004, 2005, during the disengagement, where most of my Paul Weiss clients had no idea that I was spending the weekends mostly in Israel with my family. I'd say just one formative thing that I think is important to this, my leadership sort of journey, was the Wexner program. I had devoted all of my life to sort of the modern Orthodox world. All of my friends who I engaged with Jewishly were modern Orthodox. My partners, my friends at the law firm, we didn't discuss Jewish topics very much. And 25 years ago, roughly, I did this Wexner leadership program with incredibly impressive people, and it opened up my eyes to this broader Jewish world that really was there. And I think in many ways, the modern Orthodox community is a little too insular, and there's a lot we can contribute to this broader Jewish world, and a lot we can learn from this broader Jewish world. And it motivated me to become a little wider in the lens of how I would engage in community.
Beautiful, and I'll echo the gratitude to Wexner. My father was a Wexner Heritage Fellow, and I was a Wexner Graduate Fellow, and the ripple effects of the impact of that experience just continues. And I was just mentioning my friends in Englewood now, several of them are in the Wexner Heritage Fellow, so thank you to Wexner. Let's talk a little bit about that moment, or a series of moments, where you did have this moment. You were a star partner at Paul Weiss, and you decided, I know you had been working for several years as a lay leader at UJA-Federation at that point, I'm sure many other causes as well, but what How did that decision unfold? I know it's been some time now and a lot has happened since then, but how did that decision unfold and what did you decide to do?
Actually, I was the vice chair of the UJA board.
Right.
And I was on the search committee to find the next CEO. This goes back to 2013. John Risquet, my predecessor, an extraordinary Jewish leader, announced he was leaving. I was put on the search committee without any contemplation remotely of leaving Paul Weiss to do this. And around 2 months into the search committee process, John Risquet asked me to lunch, as he would from time to time. And he said, Eric, you've been practicing law for a long time. You seem to like our work. And what do you think about getting off the search committee and becoming a candidate? And I was floored. It was really not anything that I had ever thought of doing. And I agonized. It took 2 months to ultimately decide to get off the search committee, to become a candidate. And even after I was a candidate, I agonized that I want to become a Jewish communal professional and leave the Paul Weiss partnership. At the end of the day, it really felt like you were jumping off a cliff and just, how would this work? I say this now, and with all real sincerity, had I known then what I know now, I would have made this decision so much more easily.
Wow.
Look, I loved my Paul Weiss career, and I'm delighted I had it. There's a time and a place for everything. And if you're interested in the issues that we are involved with at UJA, there's no better perch to be in. And so this has been a blessing this last 11 and a half years. But that's how it happened. John Risquet was the one who motivated, first put the idea in my head to think about it.
Wow. All right. So let's continue from that moment in time. I have 3 questions that are kind of all the same and different because it all unfolds. Sure. Tell me first about the first few months in the role, right? And then also, I think at some point, at least I've had this, what you notice when you become a CEO and you're on the professional side and not the lay side. I don't know if which came first there, so you could share.
Well, first of all, we had done this very careful onboarding, what we were going to do when, week, by month, and a whole education process. And in a tragic way, I started at UJA on July 1st, 2014. The prior day, the 3 yeshiva boys who were kidnapped were found murdered by Hamas, and Israel went to war the next day. That was Tzuk Eitan, Protective Edge, in the summer of 2014. And the first public appearance I ever had at UJA was speaking at a synagogue on the Upper East Side at a memorial service, my first day of work, for the 3 boys.
Wow.
And I ended up spending much of that summer. I probably did 5 or 6 trips to Israel in the next 2 or 3 months. We can talk about how UJA operates, but we immediately started working with the partners we've worked with in the South for decades, and were able to quickly deploy significant additive emergency funding. But that was my, entree into UJA, and it's in ways, characterized the 11 and a half years that followed, meaning we've gone in ways unimaginable from the perspective of not that long ago, from crisis to crisis to crisis. And I wish I could say the trajectory has, turned back upward, but it continues to become more negative. So we can tick them off, but that's how I started. And so, I learned by doing immediately. And I learned a lot about our community and a lot about strengths and weaknesses of community. But one of the strengths of this community, unfortunately, it's not sufficiently long-standing and sustaining, is during crisis, the community really comes together. And you feel the power of this community in times of crisis, and then we're back very, very quickly, too quickly, to our old bickering. But when those 3 boys were discovered killed, this sense, we had prayer services around the city. Every denomination came together. There was a real sense of pulling together Israel and American Jewry. It just didn't last very long.
Right. Got it. Okay. So there's a lot there. Well, and let's talk through that a little bit, because I know that you did. It's unbelievable when you think about the crises that you dealt with, which, the war in Ukraine, which people might not associate with the UJA-Federation crisis, but that was very interesting. Of course, COVID, which was a universal thing, but you guys were at the forefront of that as well. And now, obviously, October 7th has been a very, let's call it the version of what happened in 2014, but on steroids in some ways. How have you thought through these different crises, and how has that impacted the way you think about what UJA does?
Yeah. First of all, you left out, those are all the right ones to speak about, but you also need to also focus on the growth of anti-Semitism. Right. If you had said to the New York Jewish community when I started in 2014, July of 2014, name the top 10 challenges facing the New York Jewish community, anti-Semitism is not on the list. That would have been true even into 2017, before Tree of Life in 2018. Charlottesville, Jews Won't Replace Us was summer of 2017. But certainly before the summer of 2017, domestic, local anti-Semitism was not a concern for the New York Jewish community. And just think to today, how vastly the world has changed. So when I think about, we were focusing again, we created a Jewish communal security force for New York in late 2018, early 2019, but it wasn't until then. Our fiscal year 2018 budget had $0 devoted to Jewish communal security, and that number is over $6 million today.
It's, oh my gosh, it's almost impossible to imagine, because
right?
now it's in the water. Any synagogue you go to has security, volunteer security, paid security.
Omnipresent. It's so, we consider this, if we ask what are the top 10, anti-Semitism is going to be the top of the list of local concerns. It wouldn't have been on the list in 2017. Right. So it just shows you, so look, you learn different things from each. I mean, we can spend a lot more time on anti-Semitism, but the first up after those was COVID. We support a incredible group of agencies that are core in unheralded but heroic ways for the infrastructure of the Jewish community of New York. The Jewish Community Center is the leading social service providers, Hillel's on college campuses, the JCRC with the largest funder by a wide margin, lots and lots of critical organizations. They were all, like imploding because they lost all revenue and how you even exist. Right. And we were not in the building, we were working remotely, and we were all dealing with our own concerns. And so, look, you learn about your leadership style, you learn about yourself, you learn about your organization, you learn about your community. The resilience of the New York Jewish community, the resilience of the Jewish community broadly is, I think, a consistent through line. And I'm incredibly inspired. I think people have views of Jewish philanthropy. I've seen the very best of people. In fact, I often joke, some of my biggest donors, our biggest donors of UJA, were Paul Weiss clients. They're much, much better as donors than they were as clients. In fact, my most difficult donor is easier than my easiest client. Right. And often they were the same people. Right. So, you see people in quiet ways doing incredible things and stepping up to help people in need. And I think it's very much a part of our community in a real way.
Amazing. And it's interesting to think about. Certainly October 7th and Gaza are different, but to imagine someone hears about what's going on in Ukraine or during COVID and them saying, I want to address that issue through giving money to the Federation. Say a little bit about that, like how you've positioned yourself in that way that people are looking to the Federation to be the leader on these universal issues.
So look, take October 7 is a dramatic illustration. I mean, UJA was a very, very significant funder in Israel for decades. In fact, UJA-Federation is the merger of two organizations. UJA, as the United Jewish Appeal, was created in 1939 for the sole purpose of funding overseas needs. Right. Pre-state Israel, the Yishuv, and Eastern Europe. So UJA was all about giving to Israel and overseas. Federation, created in 1917, World War I is raging, dramatic poverty, over 1 million Eastern European immigrants, extraordinary need. Federation was created only to address local needs of the local New York Jewish community. And they merged in 1986. But so UJA-Federation has been involved in supporting Israel literally from before the state was created. We started this conversation by talking about the Protective Edge in 2014. Protective Edge was a much smaller model of what happened on October 7. A huge war in the South, concentrated in the South, without the trauma of an October 7 event, but you had the 3 yeshiva boys kidnapped. And within days, we had literally tens of millions of dollars of emergency funding going to the organizations we've been funding for decades in the South who know what the needs are and how to deploy the funds. That's a powerful message, so people know that literally a flip of a switch, we have the ability to go to existing partners who have the ability in scale, with reach, to address the needs of those communities in the South. So what happened in 2014 happened again from our perspective. The playbook was already written.
Right.
It just on a much larger scale, and people see that. So, our community was incredibly philanthropic, but we raised over $200 million in emergency funding for Israel in a relatively short period of time, because people recognized that we had the ability in a single stop sort of way they can give us a gift and we would spread it across the needs in an efficient way very, very quickly.
Beautiful. And I'll ask you one more. This isn't PC, but I'll just ask it. The knock traditionally, not from you, just from what you hear, is that Orthodox Jews don't give to Federation, they give to Orthodox causes, and non-Orthodox Jews give to museums and not Federation. They're both their priority is not UJA-Federation, the equivalent in any state of UJA-Federation. It's let's do arts and culture and I'll worry about the Jews later, or let's worry about my corner of the Jews and not the broader cause. Have you seen, I won't ask you if that's true or not, but have you seen shifts in those priorities over the past either 2 years or 7 years? Or 11 years, I should say.
Well, over the last 2 years, dramatic shifts.
It's gotta be, right?
Over the last 2 years, I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had with very, very significant donors and, just people who are thinking about this, who have said that historically I've given to my, universities, and I feel abandoned and really angry, and I would give to my cultural institutions, and they were largely silent or worse in the wake of October 7, and it's time for me to reorient my philanthropy in a much more Israel Jewish directed way. I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of those conversations. The broader point around that, we've also seen something called the surge, what we call the surge, which is those beyond giving in a more directed way towards Israel and Jewish life are also more interested in engaging Jewishly.
Right.
So they're going to synagogue, not necessarily to services more, but to synagogue programming. We do Friday night dinners at UJA on a regular basis for different young leadership groups. Since October 7, they've been selling out in a day, and they still are. Right. So we've seen in the last 2 years a dramatic continuing reorientation around giving from across the spectrum.
Beautiful. All right, and I'll ask another quasi not PC question, but I'm just trying to learn from you. I remember, I'll just be honest, I remember seeing someone very, very philanthropic. I guess it was after October 7th, but it was when everyone was focusing on the universities piece of it, and I was like, this just feels like an arms war in terms of who can spend more, those who are pro-Jewish and those who are anti-Jewish, and there's no way we can win that war, both in terms of our numbers and our finances.
We're not going to beat state actors who are, Qatar and
right.
many other, Gulf states that are dramatic funders of universities. Look, I think the Jewish philanthropic giving to universities is considerable. But no, if you're talking about relative ability to win that simply on the basis of who contributes more.
Right. So what's the game plan?
Around universities?
Around in general, if there's whatever the place is, right? Pick your university as one battlefield, let's say, but in all areas, if at the end of the day, maybe in the past you would say Jews working in government and having political positions and having finances can help support our cause. What do we do when it's David versus Goliath when it comes to both numbers and finances at a certain point?
Well, look, I think that the universities are a particular, and we could spend a lot of time talking about universities, and obviously there's been a lot of, the crazy thing about almost any topic we speak about is about how quickly events are moving and how the world as it existed not that long ago has been so dramatically transformed. That's clearly the case of universities. I suppose almost anything we can talk about. So universities are very different, and they, with the federal involvement, there are lots of good things, and you could reasonably debate, are they all good, are they all not so good, but universities are being motivated in a very, the federal government is an even more powerful lever than Qatar.
Right.
And so you're seeing lots of significant changes in the universities. I think people can ask whether all of these government influences are good or not. Our community is significantly divided on this, like every other issue, but certainly the world has changed. Look, I think for many issues, resource is not our challenge. It's more what is the vision of leadership? What are the most important levers of change? There's a lot of resource in our community. And I just think it's more a question of better coordination and greater vision about how you meet the moment appropriately.
I love that. That's amazing. Let's talk about that for a second, because I feel like, obviously it's hard to project onto others, but it feels like other actors out there, it's like everyone's on the same page and they're just like pushing forward. And I can only imagine,
if there's a world that exists like that, I don't know if
it's not in the Jewish world. It's outside of the Jewish world, but you see some solidarity. I don't want to.
Look, I think DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, have had a very consistent strategy. Everyone's on the same page, and they are executing well on that plan. And they've been doing it with a sense of urgency when we were sort of fat and complacent, and not doing things on the same page. Look, I don't know that we need to be entirely on the same page. There are reasonable differences you could have. Close your wallet to a university versus, engage from the inside. You can't influence a conversation you're not a part of. On the other hand, you want to show and start, fund the great University of Nebraska. Those are, I actually don't think there's a right answer.
Right.
And we have our community very much split. So I'm not sure there's a single game plan. I do wish that our various perspectives would live more harmoniously together rather than spending so much time demonizing the other. Right. The number of people who believe, shut your wallet, who, bitterly condemn and demean those who are let's sit at the table and work, and vice versa. The amount of people who look at the close your wallets and say, you're outrageous and ridiculous. I think there are reasonable approaches to the current challenge, and we need to be a little bit more agreeable across difference. We must become more agreeable across difference because our challenges are getting harder and harder, and we have real enemies, and they're not those two sides. They are both want the same thing with very different perspectives how to get there. We have real enemies, and we need to focus on them.
Beautiful. I love that. And I think, I can only imagine, even within key UJA-Federation stakeholders, there must be people that have such a wide spectrum of political views. It's actually fascinating to imagine you corralling them together. I don't know if you want to share specific stories or whatever it is, but what is your strategy for trying to get people that are so far apart to get together around something?
Well, first let me just diagnose the challenge a little bit more. And it's changed. It used to be that the divides were religious divides, denominational divides. The ultra-Orthodox, the modern Orthodox, very different from the Reform or the conservative, let alone those who only culturally Jewish. Right. So it was, the fault lines were religious, denominational often. Now they're very much political fault lines, and you're fighting pew to pew in the same synagogue. And that's a new reality, and a newer, more dramatic reality. And as I think our community has become more concerned, rightfully, with the challenges and where we are, I think we've become even more shrill in our anger at the perspective we think is the wrong one within our own Jewish communal response. So there's even a more demonizing rhetoric against someone on, left of center from someone right of center, and again, right of center, if left of center, it goes both ways. And that's become much, much more difficult to navigate. At UJA, what I keep saying is, I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. We shouldn't care. We have common challenges confronting our community, and our special sauce for decades and decades has been that we have people who are, deep, MAGA Republicans, and before MAGA, just, heavy conservative right and very left liberal, and they come together to address common challenges in the community. It's harder to hold the center for sure, but I think we need to do everything we can to try to hold it and to try to grow this sense of we're in this together, whether you're here or you're here, because we share a common concern. We're just diametrically opposite on the best way to move forward and have the greatest positive impact.
Beautiful. And is there, I remember, I'm giving examples, they both happen to be to the left, but you don't have to, they're just examples. I remember after October 7th, some people saying that there needs to be a red line somewhere where the tent begins and ends. Like if someone is anti-Zionist, then they're beyond the pale. Or, certainly in recent weeks, people kind of saying, a Jew voting for Mamdani, like what's going on there? And I'm not projecting those examples, right. I'm just trying to ask, is there feel like there's somewhere where the tent, where it's no longer a common cause anymore? Like what is the common cause and what is outside of the common cause?
Look, I think anyone who believes that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state is in the tent, and that Israel should exist as a Jewish state is in the tent. And so that includes a very, very broad, I think binationalists are out of my tent. People who believe that Israel shouldn't be a Jewish homeland, doesn't have a right to Jewish self-determination, I think they're out of my tent. But my tent is pretty broad, and it means that I would include in the tent people who are incredibly right of center, hard-nosed, and also people very left of center who believe that there are many, many, many things going on in Israel right now that they're concerned about from a policy perspective. They have vehement disagreement with coalition policies and actions. I think we need to keep both of those groups in the tent, no matter how difficult, and recognizing that not only, but largely, there is also a generational divide that we ignore at our peril. I think that if you looked at the 18 to 30-year-old non-Orthodox world and asked them their current perceptions of Israel, you're not going to get dramatically good news. And we can either avoid that and sweep that under the rug, or we can confront that and figure out how, in a real, sensitive, respectful way, continue to engage that community who, again, believe Israel should exist as a Jewish homeland, but they're ever more concerned that Israel is living up and whether they're prepared to continue to engage as they see Israel become a country that they're less and less comfortable with. Again, I'm not weighing in. I'm saying that these perspectives exist. I think that's all part of our big tent. And as difficult as it is, and while the war was raging, it was almost impossible to have a conversation about this. I hope that please God, the ceasefire should sustain, and rebuilding in Gaza should really begin in earnest, and it will allow us with a little bit less heat to figure out a way to stitch this community and keep this very broad tent together.
Beautiful. And I'll ask about the generation thing while we're on that, which is, another one of the knocks on federations more broadly, not specifically UJA in New York, was this idea that, the older generation kind of sent their money to the federation and then moved on, and now there's all this like pet projects and focus on specific things. Have you seen either change over the 11 years you've been there, and also what do you see as like the evolving new concerns of the next generation as we think about the future?
So first of all, the framework you say that I want to give to directed things is not simply younger generation, and that's been around for a long time. And there's also been an explosion of private foundations, much of that, from very, very significant affluent Jewish families historically would have given the majority of their philanthropy through a federation, are now having private foundations. To my mind, it shouldn't be either or. I understand the desire to touch and feel and focus on a particular passion, but there's a leveraging effect. If you want to have a system-wide impact on an area of real challenge, leveraging your gift as part of a community gift in a concentrated, strategic way can move the needle. And our leaders, our lay leaders today, are very deliberately people who have very significant private foundations, who do everything that they want to do by themselves and precisely the way they want to, but who also give significantly the federation, recognizing that it's not an either or, it's a both. In terms of the generational issue, I think there are a couple of things. I think that increasingly, again, the 18 to 30, mostly but not exclusively, non-Orthodox, don't hear their voices enough within the Federation, and therefore say, it's not about I want to give to a targeted thing. It's just I'm not sure my values and even my Jewish lens as I think about it are represented in what I see and hear about Federation, something I think we need to be very, very focused on. But two, I think people, there's a lot of online giving, we used to have a dramatic information advantage. We have no information advantage. We have a lot of learning and sophistication, but if you want to spend enough time doing due diligence, from your iPhone, you can get, enormous information and create your own portfolio. I think we need to recognize that as well. But I think that the federation model has never been more self-evidently important, given all of these crises, and the ability to take large money in a concentrated way to address strategies. And I think more and more people recognize that. Right. And so I don't get the sense that the federation case giving has gotten weaker. I think it's gotten stronger in the public mind, and obviously we can do better.
Beautiful. And as you mentioned before, you also have the relationships in place to leverage, which is great. All right, so let's talk about, you mentioned anti-Semitism a little bit, and how it was literally not even in the budget, right, and how much has changed since then. I know you're not whatever, I don't know who's an expert in anti-Semitism, but from where you're sitting and the information you have in front of you, what's the story that what's your understanding of how that's changed? What have been the levers that have caused it to change, and how has it changed? And if you want to focus on New York, that's fine too. I know there's different areas.
Look, I think that we're not paranoid here. Before 2017, the reason it wasn't on the community agenda locally, it was on the community agenda. We were focusing and funding, security, resiliency in Europe, in France, Paris. We did a solidarity trip to France shortly after I started in 2014, and then there was Hyper Kasher, supermarket massacre, Charlie Hebdo. A lot of it was and a frightened, beleaguered French Jewish community. So we were focused on that. But I remember coming back from that a trip to France saying, thank God it isn't here, and how wrong I was. And so, Tree of Life woke up this community, Jews being killed in synagogue because they were Jews. It was followed up in 2019, there was a shooting at a Chabad in Poway, California. And then beginning in the fall of 2019, almost daily incidents of anti-Semitism, violent anti-Semitism, directed at visibly Jewish people in Brooklyn, and then, we thought that COVID might give it a break, but then there was the sense that, Jews created COVID for profit, and then, October 7, just was a dramatic accelerant. But we've been feeling, a normalization of both hateful anti-Semitic rhetoric and violent anti-Semitic incidents with regularity in a community that requires us now to focus on Jewish communal security. And it's something UJA, our organization, thinks about all the time. New York is the largest Jewish community in the world outside of Israel. And, I never historically worried about, the vibrancy of this community. Because of all of these succeeding events and we're getting more and more unsettled, our community has become more fragile, making it critically important. The first most important issue is a sense of well-being and safety. Our community needs to feel safe, or otherwise it won't continue to engage publicly, proudly in Jewish life. And so we are now spending an enormous amount of time for the first time thinking about, the first time since 2018, thinking about Jewish communal security, and more and more and more each year. That said, if you ask me about scarce philanthropic resources, I think as a community we still may be overspending on the fight against anti-Semitism and defeating the internet and, having more you talked about the arms race or the funding gap between state actors and Jewish philanthropists. Same is true about the internet. You have state actors who are pushing out content for deliberately destabilizing ways in America, much of it anti-Semitic. We have to understand the realities of who we're up against. We need to spend money fighting anti-Semitism, and certainly on security. I would spend more communal funding than we are currently on a positive Jewish life, Jewish education, from an early age, across all ages and stages of Jewish life, providing high quality education, programmatic opportunity, experiences in Israel. We need to become a much more literate, proud, educated Jewish community, and it's never been more important. So we need to spend fighting anti-Semitism. We need to spend even more creating robust Jews who proudly walk through life feeling a real sense of pride and identity.
Beautiful, and I think we try to echo that in our work here as well at JBS, because when I first joined, people were like, you should have a 24/7 news channel that just keeps people up to date to the second about anti-Semitism in Israel. And I realized if the whole goal is to just make people anxious and worried about it, it's a great fundraising tactic, but if the whole goal is to make people anxious about anti-Semitism in Israel and not create any space for them to hear that Jewish conversation and develop that robust identity, we've lost the game.
Yeah, and we can't whitewash the challenges. Right. We should be clear-eyed about the challenges. But, we have these communal resources, and we know we've not done an adequate job educating our young Jews, trying to give them some crash courses as they enter college is far, far too late. Investing in summer camps, in, Jewish education, whether it's day school, which is incredibly powerful, or really robust non-day school educational programming, Israel trips, bringing people together. It's never been more important, and I think it is the most critical single thing we can do to position our community to go forward with strength and resilience.
Beautiful. All right, as we jump from anti-Semitism, I want to talk a little about Mayor-elect Mamdani. So I want to really just hear all your reflections on it. I think some of the things that I'm thinking about are kind of what you've learned from this experience, how we got here. Is this a watershed moment in New York and American history? I think everyone's struggling with these questions right now, and you're certainly at a unique perch to think about them.
So look, this is a new chapter, certainly for the New York Jewish community. We have never, ever had a mayor-elect, a mayor who believed that Israel was a genocidal state, who believed that Israel didn't have a right to exist as a Jewish state. So this is a whole new chapter. This didn't happen out of nowhere. And one of the things, again, in retrospect, as a community, we should have been much more engaged in fighting against, was this Democratic Socialist of America movement that in a very disciplined way, with a deep sense of urgency, set out to capture, seats on our city council, get involved in community boards and school boards. We lost races against DSA members because our Jewish community never showed up and voted. Mm-hmm. We historically, the Jewish community of New York, have not been very civically engaged at the local level. I think that if you asked even today, most of your viewers who their local city council member is, mm-hmm. who their local state senator or state assembly member is, who's on their community board, who's on their school board, they'd have no clue. Shame on us. Mm-hmm. In 2021, we got an alarm bell. Again, Richie Torres helped us see this alarm bell, but there was one very quick vignette. May 2021, there was a mayoral primary, and it coincided with, before October 7, the last significant flare-up between Hamas and Israel. And it also led to mixed fighting in mixed cities between Israeli Arabs and Jewish communities in those neighborhoods. And Andrew Yang, May 2021, Andrew Yang at the time was the front runner in the mayoral primary, and he tweeted how outrageous it was that Hamas was indiscriminately firing on innocent Israeli civilians, and how he stood with the people of Israel in this moment of crisis. A couple of days later, because of a lot of flack from the political crowd that he was concerned about, he withdrew the tweet, and he said, I should have been a little bit more balanced. I do worry about the people of Israel, at the same time the aspirations of the Palestinian people and their suffering. Again, I'm not concerned about Palestinian suffering either, but the need to withdraw that tweet is crazy and was an alarm bell for us that the political environment in New York had changed in a really dramatic way, because for decades before, you didn't have tweets, but for decades before, every mayor in a Democratic primary would have done that tweet that Andrew Yang did, that statement, and would have been wildly applauded, and that was the safest kind of sentiment to express and expect it to have a positive electoral effect. And that changed in 2021. In the wake of that, we helped create, it didn't operate because we can't, it became a 501c4, something called the New York Solidarity Network, Nissan, which began focusing at the city council, state senate, state assembly level to create pipelines of people who would run, and also to tell people about slates. But it turned out to be too little, too late, and we need to do more. I'm glad we started it. We should have started 5 or 7 years before. A lot of people who are in the city council who are not our friends wouldn't have been in the city council had we mobilized our Jewish community to vote. We showed some real progress this year. We spent over $1 million UJA on get out the vote efforts, and people look at the result, and are unhappy given Mayor-elect Mamdani. but 20% of the new registered voters in New York over the last year are from the Jewish community, and they're from communities, Russian Jewish community, some Haredi areas, where they were much less civically engaged. So we need to become more civically engaged. In terms of Mayor-elect Mamdani, look, it's enormously concerning. He says he's going to be very focused on Jewish communal security and well-being. He's asked Jessie Tisch, who is spectacular, to stay on as police commissioner. We'll see if she does. I'm glad to see that. I hope that he and his administration understand that every single thing they do to advance a pro-BDS agenda will make it that much less likely that he'll achieve and succeed with his affordability agenda. So hopefully he'll be smart. I think we have to hope for the best and plan for the worst, but we'll see what comes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think it's weird. I think before every election you hear people say, like, if so-and-so is elected, I'm moving to Canada, I'm moving to Israel, that kind of thing. And I know, like, a lot of New Yorkers, I live in New Jersey, everyone's kind of been like, all right, like our real estate's going to go up because of, who knows. I hear your level-headedness, which I think is very helpful. I think this happened with Trump also, for those who hated Trump, this idea that, like, people kind of were protesting so much before Trump did anything that when there were real things Trump did that they could have protested in those camps, it was too much noise, if that makes sense. So I'll ask my next question respectfully but interestingly as well. I think one of the stories we've heard a lot of Jews, especially in New York, say is New York or Israel, New York or Israel, New York or Israel. I think you have 2 in New York and 2 in Israel, is that right?
Right now, we're 3 and 1. 3 in Israel, 1 in New York,
okay, fine.
Of our kids.
One for the year.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah. So, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, but how are you thinking about that question in terms of thinking long term, in terms of the Jewish community in New York or Israel? And some people are throwing in Florida. Florida, then Israel.
Well, first of all, the Israel Saturday Night Live, Eretz Nehederet, did a little skit recently where you have a New Yorker fleeing New York and at the airport and running into an Israeli fleeing Israel, fleeing to New York, and they sort of meet there. It's not so funny, but it does sort of get to your question. Look, I actually think that history has shown that Israel is absolutely vital to our well-being. A vibrant Jewish and democratic state of Israel is the most important North Star we need to focus on as a Jewish community. The most important North Star we need to focus on as a Jewish community. The need to strengthen, to sustain a Jewish and democratic state of Israel. That said, I think having a strong diaspora Jewish community is also incredibly important. I think there's a very clear synergy. I think Israel is stronger when you have a vibrant, strong diaspora Jewry, and diaspora Jewry is certainly stronger when you have a vibrant and thriving Israel. And look, I would hope, as you noted, 2 of my children and 1 sort of on the fence, currently there, have made the decision to make Aliyah, and we're incredibly, incredibly proud of that. At the same time, I believe it's an entirely genuine, wonderful decision as well if you decide that I'm going to be, deeply committed, engaged, communally Jewish person living in New York or Miami or name your place. I actually think having Yerushalayim and Bavel, is Israel and Bavel are both really important, and I hope they both stay incredibly strong.
Beautiful. You mentioned a little bit about someone coming up today. That's certainly a question I'm thinking about, and I get this question all the time, but you're in a much different position than I am in terms of someone who wants to contribute meaningfully to the Jewish world, following the lay leader path versus following the professional path. What advice do you give people, and kind of how do you make sense of that question?
Yes, as might not shock you, there's no right answer to that question. There is not a single preordained path to maximum Jewish leadership. many of our lay leaders who have professional lives, incredibly successful ones, have profound impact by what they can achieve and by the influence they have by virtue of this decision affirmatively not to become a Jewish communal professional. And at the same time, I can tell you when I came to UJA in 2014, as you know, we came from a fancy law firm that prided itself on hiring the best and the brightest. Yes. And I wondered, I've been very involved as a volunteer with our senior professional leadership, but I didn't know much of the rank and file of the UJA professional staff. Extraordinary people who could have chosen to do anything they wanted in life, and out of a sense of mission and purpose, oftentimes with sacrifice, decided to do what they did. And by the way, living incredibly happy, fulfilled lives. But it shows you that there are multiple choices, and you can change. I thought I was going to be on a professional leader track to the end. It shows you that there's not one way and you can get off a road and on another one, but there is truly not one way, and we need incredibly good, strong Jewish communal professionals, and we need incredibly strong, committed, excellent Jewish volunteer leaders.
Beautiful, beautiful. You mentioned at the outset that 1,000 times again you would make this decision over and over and over again. Yeah. Just share with me, you're looking back, I'm sure, a little bit, although you're probably too busy to look back right now. We'll do this again when you're really done. But share with me a vignette, like a story that sticks with you from from your tenure that was really powerful when you think of your time at UJA.
Oh, that's really, there are
I'm sure there's thousands.
So many.
Yeah.
Look, during COVID, we had a staff meeting, certainly weekly. It's interesting, I always used to, and I still fret, upset about the degree to which our organization exists in sort of buckets, and that there's not enough of a cross-organizational vision. And during COVID, when we were physically separate, we never felt more together because we had this, we recognized the moment, we recognized the need. I am dazzled by civil society, something that, I sort of knew, but the power of what philanthropy can do can't substitute for government, can only supplement government. But, in the wake of October 7, where the government was stuck in a lot of ways, the heroic partnerships of civil society, people coming together to volunteers, public-private partnerships, again, without government, was astonishing. So I, just sort of from a large structural perspective, it's a world that I sort of, as a volunteer leader, I was the vice chair of our board, I was on the boards of many, many organizations, but until you're in the thick of it day in and day out, hard to imagine just how inspiring a Jewish philanthropic world we have. And I'm not talking about just giving, people doing. And it's the envy, I meet with my opposite number in the Catholic world all the time, the head of Catholic Charities. And the weediness, the scale, the depth, the reach of the Jewish philanthropic enterprise is just amazing, and really does unbelievable things. In terms of individual stories, you see the impact of a grant. How it literally, you see philanthropy literally changing people's lives. You don't have to think theoretically, have you moved the needle today?
Sure.
We opened up a one-stop social service hub in Queens that has a digital online food pantry. So it's like Fresh Direct, but you don't pay. It's a point-based system, and it promotes healthy eating and the dignity of choice. It's amazing. People come in because of the food, but they get holistically worked up and they find they can get a job. They've been earning $30,000 and we can give them training that they can go literally, we know that job is available at $65,000. That's the difference between crisis and stability. And you meet these people whose lives have been entirely transformed by virtue of philanthropy. You see that in Israel. I mean, I've been to Israel. Literally, I just came back from my 20th trip since October 7. Every trip you see real challenge, I don't want to sugarcoat, you see extraordinary inspiration, and you also see the impact of your philanthropy. So in that sense, again, I was one of those people who loved being a litigation partner of Paul Weiss and with wonderful clients and interesting, really challenging matters. But to be able to devote your day to this, it's amazing. It's really, in sincerity, it's a blessing to be able to do this.
Beautiful. All right, final question. Please God, in June, you're going to be handing off the baton. We've talked a lot about the past and about the present moment. Tell me a little bit around kind of, as you're handing off that baton, what do you see as kind of the next chapter, both in terms of challenges and opportunities for UJA-Federation of New York, and what gives you hope?
Well, look, let me even go broader than UJA-Federation of New York. I think that we need to spend, I think the most critical challenge, and people may agree or disagree, is our disunity. I really believe that. And I don't want to be Pollyannish and we're all going to come together. I think you need courageous leaders who represent center-right organizations and who represent center-left organizations, and even broader right and left, to essentially come together and say, we will continue to disagree about strategy and tactics, but we share a common goal, and we will not, and we will, in some way that has teeth, enforce those organizations, those players who demonize the group. But you need to have that group, to have a center-left group come together around that, it's meaningless. You need to have a sufficient cross-section of our Jewish community come together with principles. And I hope that happens. I hope that to be a part of my next chapter to try that. And by the way, it's really, really, really hard, but I think essential. I think focusing on our younger generation is absolutely critical. We're too small a Jewish community. We're a tiny, tiny minority, 15 million people. We can ill afford to cleave off large chunks of our future and say, we're not as concerned about them. Jewish education, Jewish literacy, again, whatever, but high quality, making things much more affordable. And by the way, you can't forget our knitting. We're the most affluent Jewish community in the history of the world, but social service needs, 25% of the Jewish community of New York lives at or near poverty. We need to continue to focus on not simply feeding them, but figuring out how to bring more and more people from the community from crisis to stability in a real way. But that said, there are a whole host of challenges, but enormous reason for optimism. In Israel, many of us have relatives. I have nephews, nieces who served in the army, a bunch of them in elite fighting units. I had a nephew got married a month before Passover. He was a commander in Maglan, and under the chuppah he spoke about his 7 close friends who were killed since October 7, and yet they danced the night away, and we're not going to have sacrifice like America's great generation after World War II who did so much. I think there's an extraordinary group of leaders in Israel who hopefully will do better than their parents. And I see here so many people who in the wake of October 7 are looking to engage in more meaningful ways, become more communally involved. So, I think we're a strong, resilient people. and I have every hope of optimism for the future, both of the Jewish life in Israel and here in America.
Eric, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. What a treat.
Thank you. Grateful to be here.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים